Welcome back to the CISA series. In this part of the series, we're moving into Domain 5, Protection of Information Assets. This is where everything comes together. It's not just about knowing controls. It's about knowing when and why to apply them. So if you've ever looked at a question and thought, I understand this, but I'm not sure what the answer is, this is the domain that fixes that. Let's get into it. Before we jump into the detail, let's just take a step back and look at where we are in the series. Up to this point, we've worked through the full CISA journey, starting with the fundamentals of auditing in Domain 1, then moving into governance and management of IT in Domain 2. From there, Domain 3 focused on how systems are actually built and implemented, and Domain 4 looked at operations and business resilience, keeping everything running. Now, in this part of the series, we're stepping into Domain 5, Protection of Information Assets. And this is really where everything comes together. All the governance, processes, and systems we've covered so far now need to be protected. And that means controlling access, securing data, monitoring activity, and responding when things go wrong. So think of this as the point where theory becomes practical. We're taking everything you've learned and applying it to real-world security controls. Let's get into it. So before we go into all the detail, let's simplify Domain 5 into something much easier to work with. At a high level, everything in this domain fits into two mindsets. On the one side, you've got protecting. This is all about prevention, stopping problems before they happen. So think about things like who has access, how data is protected, how systems are secured. That's where identity and access management comes in. Data classification and encryption, network and endpoint security, and even physical controls. All of that is designed to reduce exposure. But here's the reality. No matter how strong your controls are, something will eventually get through. And that's where the second mindset comes in. Detecting and responding. Now the focus shifts. You're no longer trying to stop the problem. You're trying to find it quickly and handle it properly. So this is where you see monitoring tools like CIEM, security testing, incident response, and forensics. Now here's the key idea I want you to take away from this slide. Security is not just about prevention. It's about balance. You prevent what you can. You detect what you can't prevent. And you respond when something goes wrong. And if you keep that simple model in mind, you'll find it much easier to place any topic and any exam question into the right context. Alright, this is where everything comes together. Think of this as your big picture view of Domain 5. Now don't worry about trying to read every single item on this slide. That's not the point. What you want to focus on is how everything connects. Right in the center, you've got the core idea. Protection of information assets. And from there, everything branches out into two main areas. On the left-hand side, you've got the first part, information asset security and control. This is your preventive layer. This is where you're putting controls in place to stop problems before they happen. So here you'll see things like identity and access management, data classification and encryption, network and endpoint security, physical controls. If the question is about protecting something upfront, you're usually in this space. Now shift your focus to the right-hand side. This is Part B, Security Event Management. This is your detect and respond layer. So now we're dealing with threats and attack methods, monitoring tools like CIEM, security testing, incident response, and forensics. This is what kicks in when something actually goes wrong. Now here's the key idea that ties this whole map together. Every topic in this domain follows the same flow. You've got an asset. That asset is exposed to a risk. You apply a control, and that control protects it. And if you go one level higher, this is your full security life cycle. Prevent, detect, respond, recover. So when you're answering exam questions, don't try to memorize everything. Instead, ask yourself, where am I in this map? Am I preventing or detecting? or responding? Because once you place the question correctly, the answer usually becomes a lot clearer. Alright, let's break this down, because this is one of those areas where people tend to overcomplicate things. At a high level, this slide answers a simple question. How does an organization actually put security into practice? And it all starts with frameworks and standards. These give you direction. Things like ISO, COBIT, NIST, AIL. They don't tell you exactly what to do, but they define what good looks like and help align business, IT, and security. But frameworks on their own don't secure anything. They need to be translated into something practical. That's where policies, procedures, and standards come in. Policies define what must be done. Procedures define how it's done. And standards make sure it's done consistently. Now, even with all of that in place, if people don't understand their role, things start to break down. That's why security awareness and training is so important. It reduces human risk and makes sure users understand their responsibilities. Next, you've got the data ownership structure. And this is a key exam area. You need clear accountability. Data owners are responsible. Custodians implement controls. Users follow the rules. If accountability isn't clear, controls don't work properly. Then there's user lifecycle management. This is about managing access over time, creating access for new users, reviewing access regularly, removing access when it's no longer needed. A lot of real-world risk comes from access that isn't properly controlled. Underpinning all of this are your control foundations. Things like documented approvals, security baselines, access standards. These are what make your controls consistent and enforceable. Now here's the key idea to take away. Everything follows this flow. Framework, policy, control, accountability. And in the exam, if you ever have to choose between governance and technology, governance almost always comes first. So don't try to memorize everything here. Focus on the structure, because once you understand how it fits together, the answers become much easier to work out. Let's talk about privacy, because this is an area that shows up quite often in the exam, and it's easy to overthink. At its core, privacy is about protecting personal and sensitive data. That means making sure data is handled in a way that is lawful, fair, and secure, and that it aligns with both regulatory requirements and organizational policies. So you're not just looking at security here, you're also looking at compliance. Now, when it comes to the key principles, there are a few that come up repeatedly. Data minimization. Only collect what you actually need. Purpose limitation. Use the data only for the reason it was collected. Accuracy. Keep it correct and up to date. Confidentiality and security. Protect it from unauthorized access. And retention. Don't keep it longer than necessary. If you keep those in mind, you can usually work through most privacy-related questions. From an audit perspective, the focus shifts slightly. You're asking, is personal data properly controlled? Is it classified and identified correctly? Is access restricted? Is it encrypted where needed? And is activity logged and monitored? You're also looking at whether there are proper consent mechanisms in place, whether retention and disposal are managed, and whether third parties are handling data appropriately. Then there's accountability. Data owners are responsible for privacy. IT implements and enforces the controls, and users are expected to follow the policies. If those roles are unclear, that's usually where the risk sits. Now, from an exam point of view, there's a simple way to think about this. Privacy is really the combination of compliance, control, and accountability. So when you're choosing an answer, look for the option that protects personal data, meets regulatory requirements, and reduces the risk of exposure. Now let's shift focus slightly, because security isn't just digital. We also need to protect the physical environment. And this is something that's often underestimated. But in many cases, physical access can completely bypass logical controls. So at a high level, the goal here is simple. Protect facilities, equipment, and infrastructure. and prevent both unauthorized access and environmental damage. Let's start with physical access controls. This is about controlling who can actually enter a location. So you're looking at things like access badges, biometrics, security personnel, CCTV, and visitor management. And more importantly, restricting access to sensitive areas like server rooms and data centers. If someone can walk in and access a system directly, your logical controls don't matter. Then we move into environmental controls. This is about protecting systems from physical risks. Think fire detection and suppression, power supply and backup systems, temperature and humidity control, and even water leak detection. Because if the environment fails, the systems fail. Now, having controls in place is one thing, but you also need to know they're working. That's where monitoring and effectiveness comes in. So you're reviewing access logs, CCTV footage, alarm systems, and carrying out periodic testing. The key question is always, are these controls actually doing what they're supposed to do? Now let's look at the risks. Typical exposures include unauthorized entry, theft, or tampering with devices, and environmental failures like overheating, fire, or power loss. And in most cases, these don't just cause security issues, they cause business disruption. So how do you reduce that risk? Through layered controls, segregating sensitive areas, implementing strong access policies, and carrying out regular inspections and audits. This is all about defense in depth. Now, from an exam perspective, there's a key point to remember. Preventing unauthorized access is always more effective than detecting it after the fact. And physical or environmental failures are usually linked to availability and business continuity risk. So when you see a question in this area, think beyond IT. Ask yourself, what physical weakness could expose the system? Because that's usually where the answer sits. Alright, this is a big one. Identity and access management is one of the most tested areas in the exam, and one of the easiest to get wrong if you don't think about it properly. So let's simplify it. At its core, AIM is about one thing: making sure the right person gets the right access at the right time. Now, to understand that, you need to separate a few key concepts. First, authentication. This is about verifying identity. Who are you? Then, authorization. This is about access. What are you allowed to do? If you mix those two up, you'll get a lot of questions wrong. Now let's talk about how access is actually controlled. You'll come across different models. Discretionary access control, where the owner decides. Mandatory access control, where rules are enforced by the system. And role-based access control, which is the most common, based on job roles. If the question mentions business roles or job functions, you're usually looking at role-based access. Then we move into authentication mechanisms. This is how identity is verified. Something you know, like a password. Something you have, like a token or smart card. Something you are, like biometrics. And the more factors you combine, the stronger the authentication. Now, AIM isn't just about logging in. It's also about managing access over time. So think about creating access for new users, updating access when roles change, reviewing access regularly, and removing access when it's no longer needed. A lot of real-world risk sits right here. There are also some more advanced concepts to be aware of. Single sign-on, one login across multiple systems, federated identity, trust across different organizations, and privileged access management, controlling high-risk accounts. If a question is about admin or elevated access, you should be thinking about privileged access controls. Now let's talk about monitoring. Because granting access is one thing, but you also need visibility. So logging, auditing, and user activity monitoring are critical. They help detect unauthorized access and unusual behavior. And finally, the risks. The big ones are excessive access rights, shared accounts, and weak authentication. If you see those in a question, that's where the problem is. Now, from an exam perspective, remember this: right user, right access, right time. And always apply least privilege, segregation of duties, and strong authentication. Now let's move into network and endpoint security. And this is where things start to become a bit more technical, but also much more practical. Because this is really about one thing: how data moves and where it's exposed. Start with the basics. Every organization has a network, whether it's local, wide area, cloud-based, or a combination of all three. As data moves across that network, it passes through different layers, using protocols like HTTP, FTP, DNS, and others. So the first thing you want to understand is, how is data flowing? Because once you understand that, you can start identifying where the risks are. Now look at the controls at the network layer. Firewalls control traffic. Intrusion detection and prevention systems identify or stop attacks. Network segmentation limits how far an attacker can move. You'll also see secure communication protocols like TLS, VPNs, and SSH protecting data in transit, and proxy servers controlling inbound and outbound traffic. But security doesn't stop at the network. You also need to secure the endpoints. This is where users interact with systems, laptops, servers, and other devices. So you're looking at secure configurations, patch and vulnerability management, anti-malware and endpoint protection, and controlling external devices. Because if the endpoint is compromised, it doesn't matter how strong the network is. Now consider remote access. This is a major risk area. VPN access controls, multi-factor authentication, and secure administration are critical. You also need to consider third-party access, because external users often introduce additional risk. Then there's shadow IT and emerging risks. This is where systems or applications are introduced outside of IT control. That creates a lack of visibility and a lack of control, which from an audit perspective is a significant concern. Finally, monitoring. You need visibility across both the network and the endpoints. So logging, traffic analysis, anomaly detection, and performance monitoring all play a role. Because if you can't see what's happening, you can't detect a problem. Now here's the key exam mindset for this area. Don't just look at the control. Look at where the data is exposed. Is it moving across the network? Is it sitting on an endpoint? Then ask, what control applies at that specific point? Let's bring a few of these concepts together into a single view. This diagram shows how identity, access, and network controls all work together within a typical environment. Start on the left with users, employees or third parties, who need access to systems. Before anything else happens, their identity is verified through an identity provider. This could be something like Active Directory, Azure AD, or a single sign-on platform. At this stage, authentication takes place, often strengthened with multi-factor authentication. Once identity is confirmed, the process moves into the access control layer. This is where decisions are made about what the user is allowed to do. Access models like role-based or attribute-based control ensure that permissions are aligned to roles and responsibilities. Only after that decision is made does the user gain access to systems, applications, databases, or internal servers. Alongside this, you have network security controls. Firewalls regulate traffic. Intrusion detection and prevention systems identify or stop attacks. And VPNs secure remote access. These controls protect how data moves across the environment. Then underneath everything is the monitoring and logging layer. This provides visibility across the entire process, capturing activity, generating alerts, and supporting investigation through tools like CIEM. The key idea here is that these controls don't operate in isolation. Identity verifies who the user is. Access control determines what they can do. Network security protects how they connect. And monitoring ensures that everything is visible and traceable. If any one of these layers is weak, the overall security posture is affected. So when you're looking at a scenario, think in terms of layers, and ask where the breakdown is occurring. That's usually where the answer sits. Now let's talk about data classification, because this is one of those areas that directly drives how security controls are applied. At a high level, data classification is about answering one question. How sensitive is this data? And what happens if it's exposed? So classification is usually based on three things: sensitivity, business impact, and regulatory requirements. The more sensitive the data, and the greater the impact of exposure, the stronger the controls need to be. In most organizations, you'll see common classification levels. Public, where there's little or no impact if it's disclosed. Internal, limited business impact. Confidential, sensitive business data. And restricted or highly confidential, where exposure could cause serious damage. You don't need to memorize the labels, but you do need to understand the logic behind them. Now let's talk about accountability. Data owners define the classification. Custodians implement the controls. And users are expected to follow the handling rules. If those responsibilities aren't clear, classification tends to fail in practice. Another important piece is the data lifecycle. Data isn't static. It moves. It's created, stored, used, transmitted, and eventually archived or deleted. And the classification needs to follow the data through each of those stages, because the risk doesn't disappear just because the data moves. Now, what are the typical risks? Misclassification, overexposure of sensitive data, and inconsistent application of controls. If the classification is wrong, everything that follows is wrong. So what controls do you expect to see? Things like data labeling and tagging, access restrictions based on least privilege, encryption for data at rest and in transit, and controls like data loss prevention. Now here's the key exam point. Controls must match the classification level. If controls are too weak, you increase risk. If they're too strong, you create inefficiency. So when you're answering a question, don't just look at the control. Ask yourself, what type of data is this? And what level of protection does it actually require? Once you think in terms of classification and impact, these questions become much easier to work through. Now let's move into data encryption. And this is one of the areas where understanding the purpose makes all the difference. At a high level, encryption is used to achieve two key objectives: confidentiality, protecting data from unauthorized access, and integrity, ensuring that data hasn't been altered. Now, when it comes to encryption types, there are two you need to clearly distinguish. First, symmetric encryption. This uses the same key to encrypt and decrypt data. It's fast, efficient, and ideal for handling large volumes of data. So if performance is a factor, this is usually the right choice. Then there's asymmetric encryption. This uses a pair of keys, a public key and a private key. It's slower, but it's critical for secure key exchange and establishing trust. So if the scenario involves authentication, certificates, or secure communication setup, this is where asymmetric encryption comes in. Now let's talk about digital signatures. These are often misunderstood. They're not about hiding data. They're about proving that the data hasn't been changed and verifying who sent it. So here you're dealing with integrity and authentication, and in many cases, non-repudiation. One of the most important areas in practice is key management. Because no matter how strong your encryption is, if the keys are poorly managed, the entire control breaks down. So you need to think about how keys are generated, stored, distributed, rotated, and eventually retired. This is often where the real risk sits. In real-world use, encryption is everywhere. TLS and HTTPS protect web traffic. IPsec and VPNs secure network communication. SSH protects remote access. And in most cases, these technologies use a combination of asymmetric and symmetric encryption. You also need to understand where encryption applies. Data at rest, protecting stored data. Data in transit, protecting data as it moves across networks. The control needs to match where the exposure is. Now let's look at the risks. Weak algorithms, poor key management, or incorrect implementation. These are the kinds of issues that can undermine encryption completely. So from an exam perspective, keep this simple. Match the encryption type to the purpose. Symmetric for speed, asymmetric for secure key exchange, and digital signatures for integrity and trust. If you focus on the objective of the control, not just the technology, these questions become much easier to work through. Let's walk through how encryption actually works in practice, because this is where the theory starts to make sense. Start on the left with asymmetric encryption. This is typically used for key exchange. The receiver makes a public key available. That key can be shared openly. The sender uses that public key to encrypt the data. And once it's encrypted, it can only be decrypted using the receiver's private key. So even if someone intercepts that data, they can't read it. This makes it very secure, but also relatively slow. Now compare that to symmetric encryption on the right. Here, both the sender and the receiver use the same shared secret key. The sender encrypts the data using that key, and the receiver decrypts it using the same key. This approach is much faster and more efficient, which makes it ideal for handling large volumes of data. But there's an obvious challenge here. How do you securely share that secret key in the first place? And that's where the combined approach comes in. In real-world scenarios, like TLS, both methods are used together. Asymmetric encryption is used first, to securely exchange the key. Once that's done, symmetric encryption takes over, to handle the actual data transmission efficiently. So if you remember one thing from this slide, it's this. Asymmetric encryption is used to establish trust and exchange keys. Symmetric encryption is used for speed and ongoing communication. And from an exam perspective, that distinction is critical. If the question is about performance or large data volumes, think symmetric. If it's about secure key exchange, authentication, or certificates, think asymmetric. Once you understand how these two work together, encryption questions become much easier to break down. Let's connect encryption to something more practical now. How do systems actually trust each other? That is where public key infrastructure comes in. PKI is the framework that manages digital certificates. It verifies identity and enables secure communication across networks. So instead of just encrypting data, you are now proving who you are communicating with. Start with the key components. You have a public key which is shared, and a private key which must always be kept secret. Digital certificates bind an identity to a public key, and this is issued by a certificate authority which acts as a trusted third party. In the exam, the certificate authority is the root of trust. If that is compromised, the whole system is at risk. Now, how PKI works in practice. A user or system requests a certificate. The registration authority verifies identity. The certificate authority issues the certificate. That certificate is then used to encrypt communication and verify identity. Think of it as a digital passport system. Now, trust models. Hierarchical trust relies on a central authority. Web of trust is more decentralized and based on peer validation. Hybrid models combine both. Most enterprise environments use hierarchical trust. Now, the key risks. Compromised private keys, rogue or untrusted certificates, and weak certificate validation. If a private key is exposed, the attacker can impersonate the owner. Now, key controls. Strong key protection using secure storage like HSM, certificate lifecycle management, and revocation mechanisms such as CRL or OCSP. In the exam, failure to revoke compromised certificates is a major weakness. Here is your exam mindset. PKI is about trust and identity verification. It supports secure communication authentication and digital signatures. If the question is about verifying identity across systems, or securing communication over the internet, PKI is usually involved. Let's walk through how trust actually works on the internet, because it's not as simple as it looks. When you open a website in your browser, you're basically asking one question: can I trust this site? Now, the answer doesn't come directly from the website itself. Instead, it starts right at the top, with something called a Root Certificate Authority, or Root CA. This is a trusted entity, and here's the key part: it's already trusted by your browser and your operating system. That trust is built in. But the Root CA doesn't issue certificates directly in most cases. Instead, it signs an intermediate CA. Think of this as a delegation of trust. The intermediate CA then issues the actual server certificate, the one used by the website you're connecting to. So when you visit a site, your browser receives that server certificate. And then it works its way back up the chain. It checks: was this certificate signed by a trusted intermediate? And was that intermediate signed by a trusted root? If the answer is yes all the way up, the connection is trusted. If not, you get that warning message we've all seen. So the key idea here is this: trust isn't created at the bottom, it's inherited from the top. And that's why the Root CA is so critical. If that trust is ever compromised, everything beneath it is affected. From an exam perspective, always think: PKI is about identity and trust, not just encryption. And if you see anything about certificates, validation, or secure web communication, this trust chain is what's happening behind the scenes. Now let's move into web-based communication technologies. And this is where a lot of real-world risk sits. Because this is how data is actually shared, accessed, and exposed. Start by thinking about the different areas involved. Email is still one of the biggest, especially with risks like phishing. Web applications and browsers handle most user interaction, typically over HTTP or HTTPS. You've also got voice over IP, cloud services, social media platforms, and even peer-to-peer systems. All of these are ways that data moves in and out of the organization. Now, with that in mind, think about the risks. Phishing and social engineering are major concerns. Data leakage, especially through cloud services or file sharing, is another. Eavesdropping, malware distribution, and uncontrolled data sharing also come into play. So the key question becomes: where is the data exposed? Once you identify the exposure, you can start applying the right controls. Encryption is fundamental. Things like TLS and secure email. Email filtering and anti-phishing controls help reduce user risk. Access control and strong authentication protect accounts. Data loss prevention helps control sensitive data movement. And web filtering can restrict access to risky sites. If cloud services are involved, there are additional considerations. You're dealing with shared responsibility models, data location and jurisdiction risks, third-party controls, and access governance. So it's not just about security, it's also about control and accountability. Then there's monitoring and detection. You need visibility into what's happening across these channels. That includes email monitoring, web traffic analysis, user activity monitoring, and threat detection tools. Because without visibility, you won't detect misuse or compromise. Now, from an exam perspective, this area is very practical. Focus on real-world exposure points. Ask yourself, where is data being transmitted or shared? And what control would best reduce that exposure? If you approach it that way, these questions become much more straightforward to work through. Now let's look at virtualized environments. And this is really about understanding how systems share resources and the risks that come with that. At a basic level, virtualization allows multiple systems, or virtual machines, to run on a single physical host. These virtual machines are managed by something called a hypervisor. So instead of one system per server, you now have multiple systems sharing the same underlying infrastructure. And that's the key point here. Shared infrastructure means shared risk. Now, in terms of components, you've got the physical host, the hypervisor controlling everything, the virtual machines themselves, and the virtual networks and storage that support them. Understanding that structure helps you understand where things can go wrong. Now let's focus on the risks. If the hypervisor is compromised, everything running on it is exposed. That's a full system risk. There's also the possibility of virtual machine escape. where an attacker moves from one virtual machine to another. You can also get virtual machine sprawl, where systems are created without proper control. And then there are resource sharing risks, where data might leak between environments. On top of that, unpatched or misconfigured virtual machines introduce additional vulnerabilities. So how do you control this? First, by securing the hypervisor, restricting access and hardening it properly. Then by isolating virtual machines, using segmentation to prevent lateral movement. You also need strong patch and vulnerability management, tight access control for administrators, and continuous monitoring of activity within the environment. And importantly, you need proper inventory and lifecycle management, so you always know what virtual machines exist and who is responsible for them. There are also broader security considerations. Separation of duties is important, especially for administrators. Virtual networks need to be securely configured. Backups and recovery processes must include virtual systems. And there must be control over how virtual machines are created and removed. Now, from an exam perspective, this area is quite specific. The focus is always on isolation and control within a shared environment. So when you see a question, ask yourself, can one system affect another? And is the hypervisor properly protected? If you keep those two questions in mind, you'll be able to work through most virtualization scenarios with confidence. This is an area where security and convenience tend to collide. The more devices you introduce, especially mobile, wireless, and IoT, the more flexible the environment becomes, but the more difficult it is to control. Think about what's involved here. Mobile devices like smartphones and tablets, wireless networks connecting users from anywhere, bring your own device environments, and IoT devices embedded into operations. All of these expand how data is accessed and shared. And that's where the risk starts to increase. Now, if you look at the typical risks, they're quite practical. Devices can be lost or stolen. Wireless connections may be insecure. Malware can be introduced through mobile platforms. And unauthorized access to corporate data becomes much easier. With IoT devices, the challenge is often even greater. Default settings, weak authentication, and limited patching. So the core issue here is exposure. To manage that exposure, organizations need strong controls. Mobile device management plays a central role, enforcing policies and maintaining control over devices. Encryption protects data stored on those devices. Strong authentication, including multi-factor, protects access. And remote wipe capabilities help reduce the impact if a device is lost. On the wireless side, secure protocols like WPA2 or WPA3 are essential, along with network access controls to manage who can connect. Now take a step further into wireless environments. Using open or unsecured networks introduces significant risk. So encrypted communication becomes critical. And access points must be properly secured and monitored. Bring your own device environments add another layer of complexity. Here, the organization doesn't fully control the device. So you need separation between personal and corporate data, clear policies, and restrictions on access to sensitive systems. Now when it comes to the exam, keep the thinking simple. More devices, more connectivity, means a larger attack surface. So always ask, who controls the device? And what happens if it's compromised? Once you focus on exposure and control, the right answer usually becomes much clearer. Let's shift the focus away from technology for a moment. Because one of the biggest risks in any organization isn't a system, it's people. Users are often the weakest link. Not because of intent, but because of lack of awareness. And that's exactly what security awareness and training is designed to address. The goal here is to influence behavior. It's about helping users understand what's expected of them, how to handle data, how to follow policies, and how to recognize potential threats. Because if people don't understand the risks, they can't be expected to manage them. Now, when you look at the typical risk areas, they are very familiar. phishing and social engineering, weak passwords, mishandling sensitive information, and unauthorized use of systems. These are all human-driven risks. And without proper awareness, they continue to happen. So what does effective training look like? It needs to be structured and ongoing. Formal awareness programs, regular training sessions, phishing simulations, and clear communication of policies. And importantly, training should be role-based, because not all users face the same risks. But training on its own isn't enough. You also need to measure whether it's working. That means tracking completion rates, reviewing phishing test results, monitoring incident trends, and looking at user compliance. Because if behavior isn't improving, the control isn't effective. Now, from an exam perspective, this is a key point. Human behavior is a control point. Training is a preventive control. And in many scenarios involving user-related risk, training is often the most appropriate answer. So when you see a question involving human error or user behavior, don't just think about technical controls. Think about awareness, because that's often where the real solution lies. Before you can apply the right control, you need to understand what you're dealing with. And that's what this section is about: how attacks actually happen. Start with the basic distinction between types of attacks. Passive attacks are about observation. An attacker is monitoring or intercepting data, but not changing anything. So things like eavesdropping or traffic analysis fall into this category. The goal here is simple: gather information without being detected. Active attacks are different. Here, the attacker is doing something to the system, modifying data, disrupting services, or gaining unauthorized access. So the impact is much more visible. Now look at malware. This is one of the most common threat types. Viruses attach themselves to files. Worms spread automatically. And Trojans disguise themselves as legitimate software. Each behaves differently, but the objective is the same: compromise the system. Then there are internet-based threats. Phishing and social engineering target users directly. Web-based attacks like cross-site scripting or SQL injection target applications. These are very common in exam scenarios because they reflect real-world risks. Now think about how these attacks actually get into an environment. Email is a major entry point, especially for phishing and malware. Web applications are another, particularly where vulnerabilities exist. And network weaknesses can also be exploited. So the focus shifts to exposure points. Once you understand the threat, you can start thinking about controls. Encryption protects data in transit. Firewalls and network controls restrict access. Anti-malware tools detect and remove malicious software. And patch management addresses known vulnerabilities. Now, from an exam perspective, keep the approach simple. First, identify the type of attack. Then determine the risk it creates. And finally, select the control that best prevents or detects it. If you follow that sequence: threat, risk, control, you'll be able to work through these questions much more effectively. And physical or environmental failures are usually linked to availability and business continuity risk. So when you see a question in this area, think beyond IT. Ask yourself, what physical weakness could expose the system? Because that's usually where the answer sits. This table brings everything together: how attacks work, how they get in, and how we respond. But instead of trying to memorize it, focus on the pattern. Start on the left with the attack method. Each of these represents a different way an attacker operates. Some target users, like phishing and social engineering. Others target systems, like malware or ransomware. And some exploit technical weaknesses, like SQL injection or cross-site scripting. Now move across to how these threats actually enter the environment. This is critical. Most attacks don't just appear, they need an entry point. And in many cases, that entry point is very familiar. Email, web applications, internet-facing services, or even legitimate user access. Then look at the typical targets. Sometimes it's users and their credentials. Sometimes it's systems like servers or databases. And sometimes it's the network itself. Understanding the target helps you understand the intent of the attack. Next is impact. This is what the attacker is trying to achieve. Data breaches, system compromise, service disruption, or unauthorized access. Every threat ultimately links back to business impact. And finally, controls. This is where everything comes together. You'll see patterns here as well. User-focused attacks are controlled through awareness and authentication. System-based attacks rely on patching and endpoint protection. Network threats are managed through encryption and segmentation. And data risks are controlled through encryption and data loss prevention. Now, from an exam perspective, this table is extremely powerful because it helps you follow a simple approach. Identify the threat, understand how it gets in, assess the impact, and then select the most appropriate control. If you train yourself to think in that sequence, you won't need to memorize every attack. You'll be able to reason your way to the correct answer. This is one of those areas where a small misunderstanding can lead to the wrong answer. So the key here is to clearly separate the different types of testing. At a high level, security testing is about making sure controls are not just in place, but actually working as intended. There's a big difference between something that exists on paper and something that is effective in practice. Start with vulnerability assessment. This is about identifying known weaknesses. It typically uses automated tools. And importantly, it does not attempt to exploit anything. So the goal here is visibility. Find the weaknesses, but don't test the impact. Now compare that to penetration testing. This goes a step further. Here, the goal is to simulate a real-world attack. So instead of just identifying a vulnerability, you attempt to exploit it. This helps demonstrate the actual impact and how serious the issue is. Then there's control testing, which is more audit-focused. This is about verifying whether controls exist and whether they are operating effectively. So you're looking at things like walkthroughs, reviewing evidence, and confirming that processes are working as expected. You'll also come across audit techniques: inquiry, asking questions; observation, watching processes; inspection, reviewing documentation and evidence. Each one gives you a different type of assurance. Now think about the risks. If controls aren't tested, you can end up with a false sense of security, and vulnerabilities may remain undetected. So regular testing is critical. From a control perspective, organizations should be doing regular vulnerability scanning, periodic penetration testing, and independent control testing. Each one serves a different purpose. Now, from an exam perspective, this is the key takeaway. Vulnerability assessment identifies weaknesses. Penetration testing exploits weaknesses. Control testing validates controls. If you keep those three clearly separated in your mind, you'll be able to answer most questions in this area with confidence. When a security incident happens, the most important thing is not just reacting, but reacting in the right way. Because poor handling can make the situation worse. First, let's be clear on what an incident actually is. An incident is any security event that impacts systems or data. And the primary goal is simple: contain the impact and restore normal operations as quickly as possible. Now, everything revolves around the incident response lifecycle. And this is critical for the exam. It always follows a sequence. It starts with preparation. This is where organizations put everything in place ahead of time: policies, procedures, tools, and training. If preparation is weak, the response will be weak. Next is detection and identification. This is where incidents are discovered, usually through monitoring, alerts, or logs. You can't respond to something you haven't identified. So detection is always the starting point during an event. Then comes containment. At this stage, the focus is on limiting the damage. That might mean isolating systems, blocking access, or preventing further spread. After containment, we move to eradication. Here, the root cause is removed: malware, vulnerabilities, or compromised components. The goal is to eliminate the threat completely. Then comes recovery. This is about restoring systems and services back to normal operations. And importantly, doing so in a controlled and secure way. Finally, lessons learned. This is where the organization reviews what happened, documents the incident, and improves processes to prevent it from happening again. Now, in terms of roles and responsibilities, you typically have an incident response team, IT and security teams, and sometimes external stakeholders depending on the severity. Clear roles are essential, otherwise coordination breaks down. Common risks in this area include delayed detection, poor communication, and ineffective response procedures. And that's why strong controls are needed. These include a formal incident response plan, clear escalation procedures, and monitoring and alerting tools. Now, from an exam perspective, this is where people make mistakes. You must follow the correct sequence. Detection always comes before response. Containment comes before recovery. And lessons learned comes at the end. If you keep that life cycle in mind, you'll be able to work through incident-related questions with confidence. Let's walk through what actually happens when something goes wrong in an organization. Because incidents are not a question of if, but when. Everything starts with preparation. This is where organizations put the foundations in place: policies, tools, training, and clear procedures. If this step is weak, everything that follows becomes reactive and chaotic. Then comes detection and identification. This is where monitoring kicks in: logs, alerts, SIEM, helping you spot that something isn't right. The faster you detect an incident, the less damage it can do. Once identified, the priority shifts to containment. At this stage, you're not fixing the problem yet. You're limiting the impact, isolating systems, stopping the spread, buying time. Only after that do you move into eradication. This is where the root cause is removed, whether that's malware, a vulnerability, or a compromised account. Then comes recovery. Systems are restored, services are brought back online, and operations return to normal. And finally, lessons learned. This is one of the most important steps, but also one of the most overlooked. Review what happened, document it properly, and improve your controls so it doesn't happen again. You'll notice this isn't a straight line. It feeds back into continuous improvement. So each incident, if handled properly, actually strengthens the organization. From an exam perspective, one thing to remember: containment always comes before recovery. And if you see repeated incidents in a scenario, the issue is usually here: lessons learned not being applied. When an incident happens, it's not just about fixing the problem. It's also about understanding what happened and proving it. And that's where evidence collection and forensics comes in. At its core, forensics is about three things: collecting evidence, preserving it, and analyzing it. This is used not only for investigations, but also in legal or regulatory situations. So accuracy and integrity are critical. The process starts with identifying what evidence is relevant. Then comes collection and acquisition, capturing data from systems, logs, and devices. And finally, preservation, making sure that evidence remains unchanged. Now, when collecting evidence, you're typically dealing with multiple sources: systems, application logs, network logs, and physical or endpoint devices. Each of these can provide part of the overall picture. But the most important concept here is chain of custody. This is critical for the exam. You must be able to prove who collected the evidence, when and where it was collected, and who had access to it. Because if that chain is broken, the evidence may no longer be trusted. There are also key risks to be aware of. Evidence can be tampered with. Its integrity can be lost. Documentation may be incomplete. And in some cases, evidence may not even be admissible. So poor handling can completely undermine an investigation. That's why strong controls are needed: formal forensic procedures, clear documentation, and controlled handling processes. There are also important practical considerations. You need to maintain the state of the system as much as possible and avoid contaminating the evidence during collection. Because once evidence is altered, it can't be trusted. Now, from an exam perspective, this is the key takeaway. Integrity of evidence is everything. You must ensure that evidence is preserved and that the chain of custody is maintained. If those two principles are followed, the evidence remains reliable and the investigation holds up. Let's walk through this scenario mapping in a way that ties everything together. This table is essentially showing how CISA Domain 5 works in the real world, not as isolated topics, but as a connected security system. Starting at the top with frameworks and standards, the message is clear. If an organization adopts something like ISO 27001 but does not implement policies, governance breaks down. That leads to inconsistent security. The control here is not technical, it is governance. Formal policies and structure align to COBIT areas like ensure risk optimization and manage security. Moving into privacy principles, the focus shifts to personal data. When data is collected without consent, the risk is regulatory breach and fines. The control is data minimization and proper consent management. This aligns to managing data and security services. Now look at physical and environmental controls. Something as simple as an unlocked server room introduces very real risks: theft, tampering, and downtime. The controls are straightforward but critical. Access badges, CCTV, and restricted areas. This links directly to operational and security management in COBIT. When we get to identity and access management, we see one of the most common real-world issues: excessive access rights. The risk becomes misuse and fraud. The key control is least privilege, supported by access reviews and multi-factor authentication. This is a core security services function. In network and endpoint security, the scenario shows malware spreading across unpatched systems. This highlights the importance of patching, endpoint protection, and segmentation. Here you see the connection between asset management and operational security. Data classification then brings structure to how data is handled. If data is not classified, it cannot be protected properly. The control is classification and labeling, aligned to managing data. Encryption techniques build on that. If data is transmitted without encryption, it can be intercepted. The control is secure protocols like TLS and VPNs. This is a direct security services control. Public key infrastructure introduces trust. If certificates are not managed, services fail and trust is broken. The control is proper certificate lifecycle management, again under security services. Web-based technologies highlight human risk. Phishing leads to credential compromise. The controls are email filtering, awareness training, and MFA, combining technical and human controls. Virtualized environments show shared risk. Poor isolation can lead to cross-system compromise. The control is hypervisor hardening and segmentation, linking back to asset and security management. Mobile, wireless, and IoT expands the attack surface. Unsecured Wi-Fi or BYOD introduces interception risks. Controls include mobile device management, secure networks, and encryption. Security awareness and training reinforces a key idea. Users are often the weakest link. Without training, social engineering risk increases. The control is structured awareness programs aligned to human resource management. System and attack methods remind us that threats evolve. If the organization is unaware, it cannot respond. The control is threat intelligence and risk assessment. Security testing tools and techniques ensure that weaknesses are actually found. Without testing, vulnerabilities remain hidden. Controls include vulnerability scanning and penetration testing, aligned to monitoring internal controls. Monitoring tools bring visibility. Without logging and SIEM, attacks go undetected. The control is continuous monitoring and analysis. Incident response then deals with what happens when things go wrong. Without a plan, response is slow and impact is high. The control is a structured incident response plan with clear escalation. Finally, evidence collection and forensics ensures that after an incident, evidence is usable. If mishandled, it cannot be used legally. The control is chain of custody and proper forensic procedures. The big takeaway from this entire table is this. Every row follows the same pattern. A scenario creates a risk. A control reduces that risk. COBIT provides the governance and management structure around it. And across all of Domain 5, you can see the full life cycle. Prevent with controls. Detect with monitoring. Respond with incident management. Learn through forensics and improvement. That is exactly how CISA expects you to think. Ask yourself, what physical weakness could expose the system? Because that's usually where the answer sits. Instead of seeing controls as isolated, this view shows how they work together across the full security lifecycle. We start with Prevent. This is your first line of defense, stopping issues before they happen. Identity and access management sits here, with controls like multi-factor authentication ensuring only the right users gain access. Next is Protect. Even if access is granted, the data itself must be secured. This is where encryption comes in, with protocols like TLS protecting data while it's being transmitted. Then we move to Detect. No environment is perfect, so you need visibility. Monitoring controls like CISA allow you to identify suspicious activity and potential threats as they occur. Finally, Respond. When something does go wrong, the organization must act quickly and effectively. Incident response processes, supported by playbooks, ensure a structured and consistent reaction. The key takeaway here is this. Security is not a single control. It's a layered approach. Prevent reduces the likelihood. Protect secures the asset. Detect provides visibility. And Respond manages the impact. If you can map any scenario to one of these layers, you'll be able to identify the right control much more confidently, especially in the exam. Now let's bring everything together for Domain 5. At its core, this domain is about protecting information assets across the entire lifecycle. Start with identity and access management. This ensures the right users have the right access at the right time. If access is wrong, everything else fails. Then data protection and encryption. This is where classification, encryption, and key management come in. You are protecting the data itself, whether it is stored or transmitted. Next is network and endpoint security. This is about securing how data moves and where it lives. From networks to devices, this is where most exposure happens. Then security monitoring. You need visibility. Tools like CISA and ID's IPS allow you to detect threats as they happen. And finally, incident response and forensics. When something goes wrong, you must respond effectively, recover quickly, and most importantly, preserve evidence. Here is the big picture for the exam. Think in layers. Access control protects entry. Data protection protects the asset. Network security protects movement. Monitoring detects issues. And incident response handles the impact. If you remember that flow, you will answer most questions correctly. Let's shift gears and talk exam strategy. This is where you turn knowledge into marks. Start with the core areas. Identity and access management is always about the right user, right access, at the right time. Encryption and PKI protect both data and identity. Network and endpoint security focuses on protecting data in transit and across systems. Monitoring is about detection using tools like CISA and ID's IPS. And incident response and forensics is how you respond and preserve evidence. If you anchor every question to one of these areas, you will simplify even complex scenarios. Now, critical distinctions. Authentication is not authorization. First, you verify who someone is. Then you decide what they can do. Encryption is not hashing. Encryption can be reversed. Hashing cannot. IDs detects. IPS prevents. And in most cases, prevention is stronger than detection. Now, top exam triggers. If you see data in transit, think encryption like TLS or VPN. If access is the issue, think least privilege and M. If something looks suspicious, think monitoring and CM. If phishing is mentioned, the best answer is often awareness training. And if there is any legal or investigation angle, think chain of custody. Now golden rules. Right user, right access, right time. That is M in one sentence. Encrypt for secrecy. Sign for trust. And remember, if you cannot see it, you cannot stop it. That is why monitoring is so important. Final takeaway. Always think about where the risk is, and apply the control at that exact point. Protect the data where it is most exposed. This is a classic CISA question, and it is testing whether you understand the real problem. The company already has MFA, so authentication is not the issue. Attackers are using stolen session tokens, which means they are bypassing authentication completely. So ask yourself, where is the control failure? It is in session management. Now let's go through the options. Option A: increase password complexity. This does nothing. The attacker is not using passwords. Option C: encrypt stored credentials. Also not relevant. The attack is happening after authentication. Option D: deploy IDs monitoring. This may detect the attack, but it does not prevent it. Now look at option B. Implement session timeout and re-authentication. This directly addresses the risk. It limits how long a stolen session can be used, and forces the user to re-authenticate. This is the only control that targets the actual problem. So the correct answer is B. Implement session timeout and re-authentication. This question is testing your understanding of key management. Encryption is only as strong as how the keys are protected. So let's look at the scenario. The encryption keys are stored on the same server as the data. That immediately creates a major weakness. If an attacker compromises that server, they get both the encrypted data and the keys, which means the encryption becomes useless. Now go through the options. Option A: data integrity loss. That is not the primary issue here. The problem is exposure, not alteration. Option C: performance degradation. Not relevant to security risk. Option D: ineffective access control. This might be a contributing factor, but it is not the core risk being tested. Now look at option B. Key compromise leading to data exposure. This is exactly the risk. If the key is compromised, the attacker can decrypt the data. So the correct answer is B. Key compromise leading to data exposure. Exam tip. Always separate keys from data. Keys should be stored securely, often in dedicated systems like HSMs or key vaults. If keys and data are together, assume full compromise. Now this is a very common CISA scenario, and it is testing whether you understand data exfiltration controls. The key phrase here is encrypted outbound traffic. That tells you something important. Traditional controls like firewalls and IDs may struggle, because the traffic is encrypted. So the question becomes, how do you control data leaving the organization? Now walk through the options. Option A: disable outbound traffic. Not realistic. The business needs outbound communication. Option C: increase firewall rules. Firewalls control access, but they cannot see inside encrypted data. Option D: deploy IDs. IDs detects patterns, but again encrypted traffic limits visibility. Now look at option B: implement DLP. This directly targets the problem. Data loss prevention tools are designed to inspect and control sensitive data. Even in outbound flows, they can detect patterns, classify data, and prevent unauthorized transmission. This is the only control that focuses on the data itself. So the correct answer is B: implement DLP. Exam tip. When you see data exfiltration, think DLP. When you see encrypted traffic, think controls that work beyond simple network filtering. Always ask, is the control protecting the network or protecting the data? The best answer usually protects the data. This question is testing a very common distinction, and it often catches people out. The key phrase is, identifies vulnerabilities but no exploitation. That tells you everything. Now go through the options. Option A, white box. This describes how much knowledge the tester has, not what type of test is being performed. Option C, black box. Same issue. This is about visibility, not activity. Option D, red team. This is a full simulation. Attackers actively exploit vulnerabilities and test detection and response. So that cannot be correct. Now look at option B, vulnerability assessment. This is exactly what it does. It identifies weaknesses, but does not exploit them. That is the defining difference between a vulnerability assessment and a penetration test. So the correct answer is B, vulnerability assessment. Exam tip. Remember this simple rule. Vulnerability assessment finds weaknesses. Penetration testing exploits them. If there is no exploitation, it is not a penetration test. Let's confirm the answer for this question. The requirement is to protect data during transmission. So immediately, you should be thinking about data in transit. Now look at the options. Classification helps you understand the sensitivity of data, but it does not protect it while it is being transmitted. ACLS control access, but they do not encrypt the data in transit. Logging helps with detection and monitoring, but again it does not protect the data itself. Now look at TLS encryption. This is specifically designed to protect data during transmission. It provides confidentiality and helps ensure integrity while data is moving across the network. So the correct answer is B, TLS encryption. Exam tip. When you see data at rest, think storage controls and encryption. Data in transit, think TLS, VPN or IPsec. Always match the control to where the data is exposed. This question is testing whether you can identify the correct preventive control. The scenario is clear. A user modifies data due to excessive access, so the root cause is over permission. Now go through the options. Option A, logging. This is a detective control. It tells you what happened after the fact, but it does not prevent it. Option B, encryption. This protects data confidentiality, but it does not stop authorized users from modifying data. Option D, backup. This helps with recovery, but again it does not prevent the issue. Now look at option B. Implement session timeout and reauthentication. This directly addresses the risk. It limits how long a stolen session can be used and forces the user to reauthenticate. This is the only control that targets the actual problem. So the correct answer is B, implement session timeout and reauthentication. This question is testing your understanding of monitoring effectiveness. The problem is false positives from the CM. That means the system is generating too many alerts that are not real threats. Now think like an auditor. You do not remove controls. You improve them. Let's go through the options. Option A, disable alerts. This is dangerous. You would lose visibility completely. Option C, add logs. More logs can actually make the problem worse. It increases noise if not properly managed. Option D, increase storage. This has nothing to do with detection quality. Now look at option B, tune correlation rules. This is exactly what you should do. CM tools rely on correlation rules to identify threats. If those rules are not tuned properly, you get false positives. By tuning them, you improve accuracy, reduce noise, and focus on real threats. So the correct answer is B, tune correlation rules. Exam tip. When you see false positives, think tuning. When you see missed attacks, think improving detection coverage. Never disable controls. Always optimize them. The question is asking for the risk of biometric authentication. Think about what makes biometrics different. You are using something you are. Fingerprint, face, iris. Now the key issue is this. You cannot change it. Let's break down the options. Option A, slow speed. That is not a primary risk. Modern systems are fast enough. Option B, credential reuse. This applies to passwords, not biometrics. Option D, storage cost. That is not a security risk. It is operational. Now look at option C, cannot revoke. This is the critical weakness. If a password is compromised, you change it. If a biometric is compromised, you cannot change your fingerprint or iris. That creates a long-term security exposure. So the correct answer is C, cannot revoke. Exam tip. Whenever you see biometrics, think strong authentication, but weak recovery, or simply biometrics are secure until they are compromised, then they are permanent. This one goes straight to a core forensic principle. Let's think it through carefully. The scenario says, forensic evidence is modified during collection. That immediately tells you something critical. Evidence has been altered. Now go through the options. Option A, delay. That affects timing, not the validity of evidence. Option B, confidentiality. That relates to an authorized disclosure, not modification. Option D, cost. Not relevant to the evidentiary value. Now look at option B. Implement session timeout and re-authentication. This directly addresses the risk. It limits how long a stolen session can be used and forces the user to re-authenticate. This is the only control that targets the actual problem. So the correct answer is B, implement session timeout and re-authentication. The scenario says, cloud access is misconfigured. That is the key word. Misconfigured. Now think about roles in cloud. Provider is responsible for infrastructure, physical security, underlying platform. Organization is responsible for configuration, access control, user permissions. Go through the options. A provider. Incorrect. They do not manage your access settings. Be both equally. Sounds tempting, but not precise. CISA prefers the most direct responsibility. C, organization. Correct. Configuration of access is the customer's responsibility. D, auditor. Not involved in operational responsibility. Answer is C, organization. Exam tip. Whenever you see misconfiguration, access control, permissions, think customer responsibility. Quick memory line. Cloud provider secures the cloud. Organization secures what is in the cloud. Before we wrap up, just a quick note on this content. This is part of my personal learning journey, based on my current understanding and experience in the field. I'm always open to input, discussion, and different perspectives. That's how we all improve. I'm not representing any organization here. These are my own views and interpretations. And if you find this material useful, you're absolutely welcome to use it as part of your own learning as well.